before.
Doctor, listening to the different nations and their representatives, both heads of state and government there, what pains, what challenges do you hear, and can they be addressed?
I think coming from the UN Environment Program, my ear has quickly picked up that climate change is a pain point for many countries across the world, for the G77, whether it is countries in the Middle East that are desert countries but are increasingly suffering even greater desertification, or African countries that are suffering immense impacts on climate change, including ecosystems loss and loss and damage, or small island developing states. All the ministers and prime ministers and ministers who are here, or Southeast Asia, if you listen to what Pakistan said, or Indonesia. So climate change remains a point of pain. And if you've listened, you will notice speaker after speaker talked about the pride this group has in getting the Loss and Damage Fund established at COP28 in the United Arab Emirates. That was a very big win. But they're also talking about the economics, you referred to it, how there is a need to review the global multilateral financial system, mostly because these countries with having to pay back debt at such a high cost, it means they're not left with enough money to pay for loss and damage resulting from climate change, for ecosystems restoration. And this being a South-South summit, with the theme being leaving no one behind, one of the things that is sitting on the minds of every leader, as you've heard, is how to lift their people out of poverty. This group of 135 countries holds 80% of the global population. It's a lot of people to lift out of poverty. So for us coming from the United Nations, even for UNEP talking about the environment, we say it's about people and nature. We want a good environment because then communities can grow food, they can rear animals, and they can do business and industry in an ecosystem that is supportive. So these things are very important, and that really resonated with me.
And I'm glad you're talking about climate, you're talking about financing, the architecture there being changed. Let's get to something that is happening. There's a very big divide between the global north and the global south. How do you hope that gap can be covered, especially in terms of economics?
That is why the multilateral process is very important. This is where we have these conversations. It's 200 countries worldwide. Getting consensus, contrary to what people think, takes more than 2 days of the group of 77+China meeting. It takes several months of negotiations because the G20 are largely the rich countries in the world, in the global north, and they generally capitalize all the multilateral funding institutions. And the G77+China, while they are the biggest in numbers, are the largest beneficiaries. But as they've also all repeatedly said, they are the least responsible for global warming. So how do you get 20 of the richest countries to negotiate with the rest of the countries? It's not an easy process. But as I said, that is why the global multilateral process is important, and that's why we must have it.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Let's get into some of the things that you have mentioned. Some of the things that we had being mentioned is the reforms of the financial architecture there, the IMF, the World Bank, the interest rate there, concerns especially in repayment. But we also have a huge appetite for loans as a continent. Is that possible? Because it's like a catch-22. How do we find the balance between the loans and the debts?
I think there is a reconciliatory possibility there. Of course, even in the private sector, business thrives on credit. So it is not the concept of debt or credit that is necessarily bad. It is the manner in which this credit is granted, the terms, principally the interest rate, and the payment periods. So that is what needs to be negotiated. It's not just the G77+China that use credit. Even the G20 countries use credit to grow their industry and economy. It's just under different terms. And that is what needs to be negotiated. So we'll take any country. I'm looking at countries here. If you look at a country like Ethiopia, I'm looking at their placard. It's one of the largest countries in Africa. A large population. It is the host of the African Union. It is a country whose prime minister is leading the Green Legacy Initiative to restore the ecosystems. How do you support such a country at an interest rate where I think I read for Uganda it's anywhere between 35 to 38%? Countries will not be able to pay back. But we also know even if it was a private sector company making business, those are exorbitantly high interest percentages to be paying back off of national GDP. So, as I said, these are negotiations that must be had. The Bretton Woods institutions that constitute these financing arrangements have been around for a while. But the world has changed since they were established, and I think that is the conversation the member states have been having. How can we revise the system so that it responds to the times that we are in? Countries suffering from the impacts of climate change, many countries still struggling to recover from the impacts of COVID, war, let's say, that has affected shipping and food supplies and leading to food shortages. So all these are things that we need to take into account and renegotiate globally on how we can create a better environment. And ultimately, within the framework of the UN, where the G77 and China is, we are looking at the SDGs. How do we eliminate hunger? How do we eliminate poverty? How do we eliminate climate change? How do we bring energy to Africa? Over 600 million people in Africa still don't have access to light and power. If that's the problem, it means we can't industrialize. It takes a lot of power and energy to industrialize. So all these are real challenges that heads of state and government need to think of, whether they are borrowing money or coming up with policies and laws. It's a huge challenge globally.